folks. Showtime.
Go on. Look up at the night sky. What do you see?
Stars? The moon?
And when you look at the moon, what comes to mind? The man in the moon? Green cheese? Maybe a rhyme or two. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. Throughout our history, people have always been interested in the night sky. Today, we will journey to Earth's closest neighbor. Let's take a closer look at the moon.
Physical characteristics.
The moon is shaped like a ball, or sphere, just like the Earth. Earth's moon is unusual in our solar system because it is so large compared to the moons of other planets. Our moon is about 1/4 the size of Earth. That means it would take 4 moons to fill our Earth. If the moon was put next to the Earth, it would look like a tennis ball next to a basketball. Like the Earth, the moon has a variety of landforms. Mountains, valleys, and large flat plains are covered with rocks, soil, and dust. But how do we know that?
Almost 400 years ago, a man from Italy named Galileo used a telescope to look at the moon. A telescope is a tool that makes things that are far away look as if they are much brighter and closer than they actually are.
It is believed that Galileo was the first person to see the detail of the moon. He saw that it had a rough surface, much like the Earth. Galileo thought that these broad, flat plains were covered with water, so he called them maria. Maria is Latin for sea. Now we know that the plains are not covered with water. They are actually lowlands made of rock covered by a thin layer of rocky soil. Most of the light gray parts of the moon's surface are rough and mountainous. These areas are called highlands. The maria occur mainly on the near side of the moon, which faces the Earth. The far side is nearly all highlands. Most of the rocks and dust on the moon's surface appear to be dark gray. On some places on the moon, the surface layer of rock and dust measures about 10 feet deep.
In 1969, the astronauts of Apollo mission number 11 set foot on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin were the first people to walk on the moon. While they were there, they collected moon rocks and took many pictures. Atmosphere.
The moon does not have air or wind. It has no atmosphere. When the astronauts walked on the moon, they had to carry their air with them just like deep-sea divers. They had to talk to each other by radio because there's no air to carry sound.
Apollo 16 is going to change your image.
On the moon, the sky is black, even during the day. You can see the stars all the time because there's no atmosphere to trap the sun's rays.
Having an atmosphere helps to control the temperature. Since the moon does not have an atmosphere, it has extreme temperatures. During the day, it gets very hot, over 100 degrees hotter than any place on Earth. This is because there is no atmosphere to protect it from the sun's rays. Because there is no atmosphere to trap in the warmth from the day, it gets very cold at night, more than 100 degrees colder than the coldest place on Earth.
Craters.
The moon is covered with craters, which look like big bowl-shaped holes in the ground. These craters were made long ago when objects from space crashed into the moon. We have some of these on Earth, too. One famous crater is Meteor Crater in Arizona. It was formed about 50,000 years ago when an object from space struck the Earth. But Earth certainly has fewer craters than the Moon. When objects from space enter the atmosphere, they become so hot that they actually burn up before they hit the surface. But since there is no atmosphere on the Moon, there is nothing protecting it from space objects. Everything that reaches the Moon will hit the surface. Craters on the Moon also look different from craters on Earth. The wind and running water that is common on the Earth wear down or erode the sides of the craters. There is no wind or running water on the Moon, so there is nothing to erode the sides of its craters. On the Moon, there's a great variety in the size of craters. The largest crater, the Imbrium Basin, forms one of the eyes in the Man in the Moon. Large objects in space hitting the Moon probably cause the largest craters. Objects like comets and asteroids. Comets are large balls of ice and dust. They usually have a tail. Asteroids are like small planets. They're made of rock and metal. The smaller craters were probably caused by smaller objects in space, like meteoroids. Meteoroids are like small asteroids. It doesn't take a very large meteoroid to make a crater. Just look at the size of the crater this small marble makes in this pile of flour.
It would take almost 2.5 weeks to count all the craters we can see, and there are even more craters on the side of the Moon that we cannot see.
Gravity.
Because the Moon is 4 times smaller than the Earth, it has less mass, and that affects the force of gravity. Gravity is the force that causes all objects to be pulled toward the center of all other objects. Gravity is what keeps us here on Earth rather than floating away. The force of gravity depends on 2 things. First, the size of the object. Big objects have greater pull or more gravity than small objects. The force of gravity is stronger on Earth than it is on the Moon. 6 times stronger, in fact. Earth's gravity is always pulling on the Moon. That's why the Moon goes around the Earth, instead of the Earth going around the Moon. The second factor that affects gravity is the distance between objects. Objects that are close together have a greater pull on one another than objects that are far apart. That's why the Moon goes around the Earth instead of another planet like Mars. Our planet is the closest planet to the Moon. Weight is the measurement of the force of gravity on an object.
I weigh 60 pounds on Earth, but on the Moon, I would only weigh 10 pounds.
That's because the force of gravity is 6 times stronger on the Earth than on the Moon. The Moon's weak force of gravity is also why astronauts on the Moon can jump much higher than they can on Earth.
Movement.
The Moon rotates or turns around like the Earth. Rotation is the spinning of an object. Long ago, people thought the sun, moon, and stars moved around the Earth. Now we know that only the Moon moves around the Earth, much like Earth moves around the sun. The Moon is a natural satellite of the Earth. A satellite is an object that revolves around another object. Revolution is one object tracing a path or orbit around another object. We say the Moon orbits around the Earth. Here's where the second factor affecting gravity, the distance between objects, comes into play. The Sun is 93 million miles away from the Earth. The Moon, at 238,900 miles away, is relatively much closer to the Earth.
It took the astronauts about 3 days to get to the Moon. It would take them about 2.5 years to get to the Sun.
It is the Earth's gravitational pull that keeps the Moon in its orbit. If the Earth, or its gravitational force, were to suddenly disappear, the Moon would no longer orbit the Earth, but the Moon would still move in orbit around the Sun because the gravitational pull of the Sun would still be there. It takes about a month, 29.5 days to be precise, for the moon to revolve completely around the Earth. It takes almost the same amount of time for the moon to rotate on its axis, about 27 days. An axis is an imaginary line that runs through the center of an object, like the moon. Because the moon spins so slowly on its axis, from Earth, we see the same side of the moon all the time.
Because of the moon's slow rotation, if you lived on the moon, your day would last about 2 weeks, and your night would last about 2 weeks too. That's a long night.
The moon has no light of its own. Like the Earth, it gets light from the sun. The sun lights one side of the moon as it rotates and orbits the Earth. What we see from Earth are called
Phases.
When we look at the moon in the sky, it seems to have a different shape each night. All the different shapes together are called the phases of the moon. It takes nearly a month to see all the phases.
The moon seems to change shape because we see only the part that has sunlight shining or reflecting on it.
The moon reflects sunlight off the part of the moon that faces the sun. The part of the moon that does not face the sun is dark. It is the amount of the sunlit side of the moon that we see from Earth that makes the phases. We see different amounts of the moon's lighted part as it orbits around Earth. The moon's trip around the Earth takes about 29 days. As the moon moves, the position of the sun and the Earth also change.
The darkness is not due to Earth's shadow. It's because the lit side of the moon is facing away from Earth. Pretend that this ball is the moon, the light is the sun, and you are the Earth. Each night, we see more and more of the lit part of the moon facing Earth until we see the whole moon. Then, more and more of the dark part of the moon faces the Earth until we don't see the moon at all. Then, the process of moon phases starts all over again.
Although a full moon seems bright on a clear night, a whole sky of moons would be only about a fifth as bright as the sun. When the moon goes through the phases, sometimes the lighted side appears to get bigger. When this happens, we say the moon is waxing. When the moon is waxing, the lighted side is on the right. But sometimes the lighted side appears to get smaller. Now we say the moon is waning. When the moon is waning, the lighted side is on the left.
The moon is waxing.
Now it's waning.
The different phases of the moon have names. New moon. When the moon is between the sun and the earth, only the dark half of the moon faces toward Earth, so you cannot see the moon in the sky. A few nights after the new moon, a thin crescent appears on the right side. This crescent waxes or gets bigger until you see a half moon or first quarter moon. About a week after the new moon, the moon looks like a half circle. The first quarter moon continues to wax until it becomes a full circle. This is called a full moon. Nearly 1 week after the half moon, we can see all of the lighted part, and the moon looks like a complete circle. The moon has moved to a point where the Earth is between the moon and the sun. A few nights after the full moon, the moon starts to get smaller again. It wanes. It continues to wane until it becomes a half moon or a third quarter moon. The moon looks like a half circle again, only the lighted side is now on the left. It continues to wane until it is back to a new moon, and the process starts all over again.
The word moon and month come from the same base word mona. That's because it takes almost 1 month for moon phases to occur.
Sometimes, during a full moon, the sun, earth, and moon line up in a way that causes a lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse is when the moon passes into the shadow of the earth. During the new moon phase, a different eclipse can occur. A solar eclipse happens when the Earth passes into the shadow of the moon.
Tides.
The moon, our nearest neighbor in space, is in a tug-of-war with the Earth over water, ocean water. On Earth, we observe tides as the rise and fall of water along the ocean shore. At high tide, the water moves high up the beach, covering it with water. At low tide, the water moves farther away from shore, and we see more sand.
Every day, most shorelines have 2 high tides and 2 low tides. High tide and low tide are usually a little bit more than 6 hours apart.
The pull of gravity from the Earth and the moon are at the heart of the tug-of-war over the oceans. The changing tides are caused mainly by the moon's gravity pulling on the Earth and the ocean water. Remember, the Earth and moon are rotating and orbiting. As they move, the ocean water facing the moon is pulled out by the moon's gravity. It bulges. At the same moment, the moon's gravity pulls the solid Earth away from the ocean on the opposite side, causing another bulge. Wherever the moon is, a bulge of water causes high tide at that point on the Earth and on the opposite side. As Earth rotates, the bulges stay in the same place. High tides occur as 2 points on Earth move through the bulges. Low tides occur as 2 points on Earth move between the bulges.
So, what did you learn?
The moon is a sphere or ball that is 1/4 the size of the Earth.
The moon has many landforms like the Earth, but because it has no atmosphere, the moon has no protection from extreme temperatures or from objects in space.
The moon spins or rotates. It goes around or orbits the Earth. It stays in orbit because of gravity.
As the moon orbits the Earth, the amount of the lit side of the moon that we can see changes. We call this the phases of the moon.
A lunar eclipse may occur during a full moon. A solar eclipse can only happen during the new moon phase.
Tides are caused by the moon's gravity pulling on the Earth's oceans and land.
From long ago and Galileo's first look at the moon to the Apollo mission's trips to the moon, we've gotten a closer look at the mystery, the power, and the beauty of our closest neighbor in space, the moon.
For more curriculum-coordinated programs, call 1-800-483-3383.
Or visit us online at schoolvideos.com.